My cab driver is trying to kill me. It was just supposed to be a quick ride to home. I'd stayed late at the office, finishing up a project I should have tackled a week ago, and by the time I stepped out onto the street, the city had turned into a ghost town. The usual buzz of honking cars and chattering pedestrians had faded, replaced by the distant hum of streetlights and the occasional rustle of leaves in the cold wind. My phone was dead. Of course it was, and the subway station a block away had already closed. So, when a yellow cab rolled up to the curb, its light glowing like a beacon, I didn't hesitate. The driver rolled down the window, a wide grin splitting his face. "Need a ride?" "Yeah," I said, pulling the door open. "Just to Parkside Apartments on Ninth Hill." "Hop in!" I slid into the back seat, tossing my bag onto the floor. The smell of stale coffee and sweat hit me immediately, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get home, collapse into bed, and forget about the day. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror as he pulled away from the curb. His face was sharp and thin, his eyes slightly sunken, but his smile stayed plastered in place, stretching just a little too wide. "So, late night, huh?" he asked, his voice casual but carrying an edge I couldn't quite place. "Yeah," I muttered, leaning back against the seat. I didn't notice at first. How could I? He was just another driver, and I was just another passenger. But then he missed the first turn. You just passed 7th, I said, sitting up straighter. The driver didn't respond, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. I cleared my throat, louder this time. "Hey, I think you were supposed to turn back there." He finally glanced at me in the mirror, his grin faltering for a second before snapping back into place. "Shortcut," he said. "This way's faster." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. The streets were getting darker, the buildings more spaced out, the bright neon signs of the main road fading into shadows. "I don't think this is faster," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been living here for years. You're going the wrong way." The driver chuckled, a low, throaty sound. "Don't worry about it. I've been driving these streets for decades, trust me." But I didn't. I reached for the door handle, the thought of jumping out flickering through my mind. But when I pulled, the handle didn't budge. Locked. I tried again, yanking harder this time. Nothing. "Hey," I said, my voice rising. "Unlock the doors." The driver didn't answer. The grin was gone now, replaced by a flat, almost bored expression as he stared straight ahead. "Unlock the doors," I shouted, leaning forward and slamming my palm against the back of his seat. He sighed, shaking his head. "Calm down," he said. "You'll make it worse for yourself." "Make it worse?" Panic flared in my chest, and I fumbled for my bag on the floor, searching for anything I could use. My phone, a pen, something sharp. But my bag wasn't there. It was in the front seat, sitting on the passenger side, just out of reach. "How the hell did—" I started, but the driver cut me off. "Relax," he said, his tone mocking now. "We're just taking a little detour." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Panicking wouldn't help. If I was going to get out of this, I needed to think. I leaned back, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Look, man, if this is about money, I've got cash in my bag. You can take it. Just drop me off somewhere and I won't tell anyone." The driver laughed, his knuckles tightening on the wheel. "Money? You think this is about money?" He glanced at me in the mirror, his eyes gleaming with something cold and dangerous. "What do you want then?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. He didn't answer. The car veered sharply to the right, throwing me against the door. We were on a road I didn't recognize now, surrounded by trees on either side, the streetlights growing farther apart until they disappeared entirely. "You ever think about how many people just vanish?" the driver said suddenly, his voice casual, as if we were talking about the weather. "What?" "Every day," he continued, his grin returning. "People get into cars, just like this one, and then they're gone. No one knows where they went, what happened to them. Just gone." I felt sick. "Someone's going to notice I'm missing," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "My coworkers, my friends. They'll come looking for me." The driver shook his head, smiling like he knew something I didn't. "You'd be surprised how easy it is to disappear." My heart was pounding now, every nerve in my body screaming at me to do something, anything. My eyes darted around the car, searching for an opening, a weapon, something I could use. That's when I noticed the dashboard. The speedometer was stuck at 0. The clock wasn't moving. Even the fuel gauge was frozen, the needle pointing to F. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. The driver's grin widened. "Figured it out, huh?" The car sped up, the trees outside blurring into streaks of darkness. I reached for the door handle again, slamming my shoulder against it, but it still wouldn't budge. "Let me out!" I shouted. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice low and cold. "Not until I'm done with you." I didn't think. I lunged forward, grabbing the steering wheel with both hands and yanking it hard to the left. The car swerved violently, the tires screeching as it veered off the road and into the trees. The driver snarled, his grip iron strong as he tried to wrestle the wheel back, but I didn't let go. The car slammed into something, a tree maybe, and the impact threw me against the dashboard. When I opened my eyes, the driver was gone. The seat was empty, the door hanging open. I stumbled out of the car, my legs shaking, and looked around. The woods were silent, the air cold and still. The road was gone, the car sitting in the middle of an empty clearing that hadn't been there before. And then I heard it, a low, guttural laugh, coming from somewhere behind me. I turned, and the driver was standing there, his face twisted into something that wasn't human, his grin stretched impossibly wide, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "You're not the first," he said, his voice echoing like a dozen voices speaking at once. "And you won't be the last." I ran blindly into the woods, the cold air slicing into my lungs with every panicked breath. Branches clawed at my face, and the darkness seemed alive, shifting and closing in around me. Behind me I could still hear him, the laugh, that low, guttural sound that didn't belong to any human. It echoed through the trees, always too close, even when I couldn't see him. "You can't run, you know," his voice called, lazy and mocking from somewhere in the shadows. "You're mine now." I didn't stop. My legs burned as I ran deeper into the forest, the light from the moon barely cutting through the thick canopy above. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, my palms scraping against the frozen ground. For a moment, I just lay there, trying to catch my breath. My ears strained, listening for any sign of him, but the forest was silent now, too silent. I scrambled to my feet, my pulse pounding in my ears, and kept moving. After what felt like hours, I saw it, a faint glimmer of light through the trees. I stumbled toward it, desperate for anything that might mean safety. The light came from a single bulb hanging outside a small wooden shack, its walls weathered and sagging with age. It didn't feel right. The air around it was too still, too quiet, but I didn't have a choice. The pursuer's laughter had faded, but I could still feel him out there, watching, waiting. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the shack was empty except for a table and a single chair. The walls were lined with tools, rusted saws, hammers, knives, each one caked with something dark and dried. My stomach twisted. On the table lay a notebook, its cover worn and stained. I hesitated before picking it up, flipping to the first page. The handwriting was jagged, almost frantic. "He isn't a man. He's something else. If you're reading this, you've seen him too. Run. Don't stop running. He won't let you go. He never lets anyone go." The door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, but there was no sign of him. No footsteps, no sound, just the same suffocating silence. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The handle wouldn't turn, and the wood felt unnaturally warm under my palms, as though it was alive. Panic surged through me. I slammed my fists against the door, shouting for help, but my voice seemed to die in the air, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. Then the lights went out. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The darkness was complete, pressing in on all sides. I could feel the air shift, colder now, carrying the faint scent of gasoline and decay. And then I heard it, a single step, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere inside the shack. The matchbox was in my pocket. I didn't even remember putting it there. But when I struck one, the flame flickered weakly to life, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. He was standing in the corner. The cab driver, or whatever he was, grinned at me, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. His face seemed to shift, his features blurring and twisting as though they couldn't hold their shape. "Do you know why I picked you?" he asked, his voice low and oily. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, my hand trembling as I held the match. "You've always been running, haven't you?" he continued, stepping closer. "From your job, your mistakes, yourself." I took a step back, the match burning down to my fingertips. "You thought I was a stranger," he said, his grin widening. "But I've always been with you. Every wrong turn, every bad decision, every failure." I dropped the match. He lunged. I don't remember how I got out of the shack. One moment he was there, his cold hands closing around my throat, his grin splitting his face unnaturally wide. The next, the world shifted, like a jolt in reality, and I was running again. The forest had changed. The trees were closer together, their branches curling down like skeletal fingers. The ground seemed softer, almost sticky, as if it didn't want to let me go. Then the old creepy laughter followed me again, growing louder, but I didn't dare look back. Then, through the trees, I saw the road. I stumbled toward it, bursting out of the woods and collapsing onto the asphalt. My knees hit hard, but the sting of pain barely registered. My chest heaved, my breath clouding in the cold night air as I frantically looked around. In the distance, headlights appeared, their glow piercing through the darkness. A car. I stumbled to my feet, waving my arms desperately. "Help, please!" The vehicle slowed, its tires crunching against the gravel shoulder as it came to a stop in front of me. The driver rolled down the window, a woman, maybe in her 30s, with kind eyes and a concerned expression. "Are you okay?" she asked, leaning slightly toward me. "Please," I gasped, my voice trembling. "You have to help me. He's coming." She glanced over my shoulder toward the woods. "Who's coming?" I turned to look, my heart hammering, but the road behind me was empty. The forest stood still, silent and dark, as if nothing had ever been there. I don't know," I muttered, shaking my head. "Just please, get me out of here." She nodded quickly. "Get in." I climbed into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut behind me. The locks clicked into place as the car pulled back onto the road, leaving the forest and whatever was in it behind. Relief flooded through me as we sped down the highway, the trees growing smaller in the rearview mirror. For the first time in what felt like hours, I could breathe. "Thank you," I said, my voice shaky. "You saved my life." The driver glanced at me, offering a small smile. "You looked like you needed help." Her voice was calm, soothing, but something about it felt strange. I looked out the window, trying to push the unease away. The road ahead stretched on endlessly, illuminated by the car's headlights. But as I stared, a sinking feeling crept into my chest. The trees on each side of the road weren't thinning out. They were growing denser, taller. Their branches curled down toward the road like they had back in the forest. The woman hadn't turned onto another highway. I shifted in my seat, glancing at the dashboard. That's when I noticed it. The speedometer was stuck at 0. The clock on the dash hadn't moved, and the fuel gauge, it was pointing to F. A cold wave of dread washed over me as I slowly turned to the driver. She was smiling now, but it wasn't the kind smile she'd offered before. This one was wider, stretched too far across her face, her teeth sharp and gleaming. "You should have stayed in the shack," she said, her voice dropping into something low and guttural. My breath caught as her eyes shifted, glowing faintly in the darkness, the same eerie light I'd seen in the cab driver's face. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. The car began to change. The seats grew slick and damp beneath me, pulsing faintly like they were alive. The dashboard flickered, and the lights inside the car dimmed, replaced by the faint, flickering glow of red coming from the windows. I tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. Outside, the trees were gone. There was nothing but darkness now, an endless void stretching out in every direction. The driver leaned closer, her grin widening. "You thought you could run. There's no running from this." Her face began to shift, twisting and melting like wax, until it wasn't a face at all, just a mask of shadows and teeth. The intercom crackled. "Passenger James Hanley," a voice whispered from the static. "Your ride isn't over yet. It just started." Well, that was pretty much it. I hope you liked the story till then. Bye-bye.